Industrial Revolution. We're going to take a look at the Industrial Revolution today, 1700 to 1900. Right, it's about a 200-year period of history. Essential question: what caused the Industrial Revolution in England in the 1800s? All right. So when y'all see the word industrial, all right, what do we think? Industry. Good.
Yeah, like working.
Working.
Factories.
All right. Factories. Anything else?
Businesses.
Machines, businesses. All right. What are they doing? Making things, mass producing things. Okay. All right. Essential question today: what caused the Industrial Revolution in England in the 1800s? All right. So the Industrial Revolution refers to this time period where we see this huge increase in machine-made goods. All right, so these are a couple pictures of here, right? Things that you would likely see during this era, right? So we see these big smoke belches or these big smokestacks coming up. A lot of the times you've got coal is what's being burned out of here. You see that smoke coming out of those. Right? A lot of times that is coal energy. There's a couple more pictures of those. Also, we've got the heavy machinery here. So this is a picture of a blacksmith factory, right? So they're manufacturing these into bars and different things like that. Steel as well, so we'll see the invention of steel during this time. Steel is a very important piece of Industrial Revolution because it allows us to build up and also allows us to make longer bridges and things like that. Steam-powered trains. Canals, we'll see canals being used pretty frequently across Europe. Canals are basically just man-made rivers. Right? It allows them to move those raw materials and manufactured goods and things like that from a big body of water inland, right, to the cities, wherever they need to go. Locomotive, right, so we see the early trains being formed at this time. What are trains good for? Traveling. What else? Transporting goods, okay? All right, so you can transport obviously raw materials, things like iron and coal and those resources we're going to talk about today on trains. All right, you can also transport people eventually, and we'd see that too throughout the Industrial Revolution. All right, bicycles are invented at this time, but really the notes will start right here. So in the middle 1700s, this is when we see this Industrial Revolution in England, right? So it's going to begin in England. All right, I guarantee you that's a test question. Right, where did the Industrial Revolution begin? England. Where did the Renaissance begin? Florence.
Italy.
Italy. All right, very good. All right. The big thing with the Industrial Revolution, just if you had to summarize the Industrial Revolution in one sentence, right? We're going to see people go from building things or doing things with their hands, right? If you needed to grow crops or create make a shirt or something, right? You're going to use your hands, okay? We're going to see a big change in people using machines instead during this time. All right, so rather than this slide right here, rather than making goods by hands, we have machines mass producing products. All right, this is going to have some very positive effects. One of those being it's going to lower the cost of making that good. It's also going to increase the profits as a result and really change the way people live. Mass producing of goods, right, is still something we use today. Right, it did not go away, right? What are all of y'all taking notes on right now?
The Industrial Revolution.
Right? What are you physically typing on? A Chromebook. Right? How many Chromebooks do you think are in the school? Right? Like 1,700, right? We got about 1,700 kids in this school. Okay? So we've got about that many Chromebooks, right? There are over 1,000 Chromebooks in this school.
Yes.
Right? My iPhone right here that I'm recording this lesson on. Right? How many iPhones do you think are in this building? Right? Hundreds, probably about 1,000, right? It's the most used phone, right? Mass produced. Right? Y'all's clothes. Right? Mass produced. Y'all are not the only person wearing that shirt, right, in the entire world, right? Those were mass produced items. It's the way we do things. It's the most efficient way to make things. We see all of that begin during the Industrial Revolution. All right, so by the 1900s, we see industrialization spread throughout Europe and into the U.S. at that point. The U.S. is going to take a little longer to adopt, right? It is obviously across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's really going to turn the Western world, Europe and the U.S., into the most dominant region in the world. Right? At this point in history, they're already the most dominant region in the world, right? But then you put industrialization on top of that, and it's going to take them to a whole new level, okay? And we'll talk about that later in the notes too. All right, so what caused this revolution? Life before the Industrial Revolution, we've got obviously a lot of doing things by hand, farming and making things, right? A lot of physical labor. Manual labor, there you go. A lot of people during this time prior to the revolution, Industrial Revolution, were still living in more like farming villages, right? Using pretty inefficient farming methods. Right, how farmers at this time were growing crops was the medieval method. So you have to go all the way back, right, almost 1,000 years to that medieval era we talked about during the Middle Ages to get the farming method that's still being used in Europe to this point. So there really, over many centuries, has not been any advancement, right, in how these farmers are growing crops. They are using that 3-field system where basically they're going to grow crops in 2 of them, and then 1 field is just going to be left to basically rest. Right, to allow those minerals to kind of regenerate, not be used, okay? And then they're just going to alternate which field they're using. Again, a medieval system that's thousands of years or 1,000 years old is what they're using. Very few of the farmers at this time are going to try new experiments. They're just going to do what their parents did, what their grandparents taught their parents, right? Because that's how it's always been done. And that's the method that farmers were using prior to the Industrial Revolution. Right, so as a result, that is going to be a pretty inefficient method, like I said, so very little food is being produced. Right? And food and population go hand in hand. Right? So this is really going to kind of put a cap or a ceiling on the population level in Europe. We saw a big growth in population after the Middle Ages. Things started to come back again, but it kind of capped out. It kind of stopped. Right? Another revolution that really goes hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution is this agricultural revolution that also takes place in the 1700s, middle 1700s. Right, so what we see here, we're going to see some of those scientific revolution ideas, right? Using science, the scientific method, right? Logic and reason being applied to agriculture, right? To farming. So we're going to see this new method, right? Instead of using that 3-field system where they're using 2 fields growing crops and then letting one of the fields just rest, they're actually going to rotate crops. So this crop rotation, right, is going to actually maximize the farmland and increase production. Okay, if 1/3 of your farm is not producing any crops, right, that's useless, right? You're not making any money from that. So instead of letting one of these rest, they're just going to rotate crops. So like this example here is showing you 1 field has wheat, 1 field has barley, clover, and turnips, right? So you have 4 different fields with 4 different crops, right? They're just going to alternate each year which field gets planted with which crop. Right? And I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of agricultural science stuff with you, but the basis of why this works is that with fertilizer, Right? There are three minerals with fertilizer. Right? You have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Wheat may use a lot of nitrogen to grow, which means it's going to deplete that and pull it out of the soil. Right? Barley may put back a lot of nitrogen into the soil and use a whole lot of potassium as its growing nutrient. Okay, so if you just alternate these around, they constantly put back into the soil the one that they're not using or that they don't need. Right, so it's going to keep the soil fertile, right, and allow you to use all of your farmland. We see new crops during this time as well. With the age of exploration, right, we see new crops being introduced into Europe, right? Things like corn and potatoes were introduced into Europe from the New World. Corn's like the most eaten food item in the world at this point. Something like 70% of everything that's eaten across the world, right, is corn-based at this point. Right, corn is huge to us in 2025. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very versatile. Can grow anywhere. You're right. With the Industrial Revolution, we see new tools, right? This ironwork, right? We're seeing the iron plow, seed drills, things like that, making farming a lot more efficient, right? I've now gotten this big tool that can grow or can plant and plow multiple rows at one time that, like a horse or a mule or something can pull. So as a result of this agricultural revolution in the 1700s, right, we're going to see more food. Right? And we know there's a direct correlation between food and population. So with more food, we're going to get more people. And more people means more workers, right? More people can work. Right? There's a chart there on the map or on the board there, right, that you can see where population really began to grow. Again, you can see it's pretty still, the early 1700s all the way up until about the 1750. Right, so those are pretty flat lines for the most part. Right, after 1750, we really see those curves start to go up again. Right, so just in general, right here, right, more food means more people. More people means more demand for goods, and more demand for goods is what led to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so the agricultural revolution directly led to the Industrial Revolution. Right? If we didn't see that big boom in population, we may not have gotten the Industrial Revolution, right, in the 1700s. All right, so when you're making things, right, these factors of production, there are some resources that are definitely needed, right? One of them being land. Right, you've got to have land. Right, somewhere where you're either growing these goods or you have a factory or some sort of building manufacturing these goods. Got to have somebody to work there, right? So we must have labor, right? And then we must have capital, right? What is capital? It's a fancy word for what?
Money.
Huh?
Money.
Money. Good. We must have land, we must have labor, and we must have money or capital. That'll definitely be a test question. Right? What are the three factors of production? Now, the reason why we see the Industrial Revolution begin in England, there's several good reasons. One of those are the natural resources that were available in England. Okay, England has a lot of coal and a lot of iron just in the ground there on that island. Okay, so they're able to build these mines, right, and collect the iron, collect the coal. Other thing, right? One of the factors of production there is capital. England had a lot of banks, right? So there was a lot of banks. The government at this point in time was encouraging trade, encouraging invention, right? So we see the access to money, right, be there in England, right? There's a lot of trade, a lot of invention, a lot of things going on, enough banks that had money. So we see this money being invested into industry. Right? You could go get a loan, right, and start a business, right, as a result. And then the other thing that England had going for it were its colonies, right? So throughout the 1700s up into the 1900s, England is going to have a lot of colonies, right? We can see obviously North America here with the Americas all the way up into Canada, all the way down over into Australia and everything in between in Africa and Asia. Right? Looking at this map right here on the board, right? Everything up there with color, right, was an English colony at some point during that 200-year period. Right? So we can see they had a lot of colonies throughout the entire globe. Right? Every continent, they had a colony, most likely multiple colonies. Okay, so they had access to a lot of cheap raw materials and a lot of markets where they could go sell these goods or trade these goods. Okay, another reason why England is where it began. All right, so 1750 to 1850 here. This is when we see England become the most industrialized nation in the world. I give them about 100 years of this process really getting going and starting, right? And they end up being the most industrialized nation in the entire world. This little map up here on the board, a couple fun facts here. Over 50% of the British population now live in these cities and work in this, and now live and work in the cities. Okay, so we see the population going into these big cities, looking for these jobs. And then Ireland, we see Ireland right here, right, beside Britain, right, part of their territory, but they didn't have coal, right? There were not these coal deposits in this island right beside Britain or England, right? So we did not see them industrialize this portion, just that main portion there in England. All right, see if y'all can guess here. What was the first business to industrialize? Right, what do you think might industrialize first? Banks? What? Clothing? Any other guesses? What industries might industrialize? Right, this use of large machineries and mass production. Any guesses? What'd you say?
Farms.
What?
Farms.
Farms? Anything else? Cars? Do what? Weapons, right? Weapons are being made at this point. Y'all have already guessed the right answer. I wanted to see how far y'all start guessing. Clothing is going to be that first industry to industrialize, right? So we're going to see the textile industry industrialize.
Hi,
Yes.
Destiny in the counseling office for a minute.
Yes, she's on her way. Right, it is the textile industry, right? Think about the population. You've got a boom in population. You've got a lot of people being born, a lot of people obviously growing and clothing, right? So there is a huge demand for clothing, right? We as humans, right? We wear clothing, unlike all the other animals, okay? So we do see that population boom, right? Create this demand for clothing. Does anybody in here knit or sew or do anything like that? All right, a couple people. If you were to make a shirt, right, how long do you think it would take you to make a shirt? I think it'll take you 20 minutes. I guess if you're sewing things together, okay? Sure, I'll give you that.
Creating the cutout and then.
Right, creating the cutout and then sewing all the pieces together.
I mean, as long as you have the print and the size, it only takes 20, 30 minutes.
Okay, 20 to 30 minutes to make one shirt. So maybe you can make 2 an hour. Sure. Okay, 3 an hour, 4 an hour, right? It's not very fast, is it? Okay, so that method of hand making clothing is slow and tedious, takes a lot of work, okay? And with this big boom in population, right, that process is just too slow to do it by hand. So as a result, right? That is one of the big reasons why this is the industry that is going to first industrialize, right? They needed more clothes and they needed them quicker. Right, we see some inventions here related to the textile industries, right? Right. So you know these spinning of yarns, these big wheels and spins here, weaving yarn into cloth, the sewing machine. These are all things that are invented during this time. Right. All of these have one thing in common, right? They are going to speed up that process of spinning, weaving, or sewing. Right. They speed it up. Right. We've got to make it faster so we can get all these clothes produced for this massive population boom that we've got. We've got to do it faster. And all these inventions accomplish that goal. And then there's this invention here. What invention is this? What is it?
Cotton.
The cotton gin. Okay. What does the cotton gin do? If you don't know, this picture here will show you. Separates the seeds from the cotton. Okay? When you think of slavery, and obviously we do live in southeast U.S., okay? But when you think of slavery, what crop is associated, do we associate with slavery?
Cotton.
Cotton, right? We think of cotton picking with slavery. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Prior to the cotton gin, and prior to or before the invention of the cotton gin, right? Slaves were not picking cotton. Okay, they were doing other things, right? Cash crops were things like tobacco, sugar, right? We talked about the sugar plantations down in Haiti. Indigo was another common cash crop. Those were the cash crops, right? It wasn't cotton, because just picking cotton, right, leaves you with this. Obviously, it leaves you with cotton, right? But all these seeds in there are way too difficult to just pick out by hand. It is so time consuming. It's almost impossible, right? It's completely inefficient, okay? But with the invention of this cotton gin here, right? This now is going to make picking cotton much more viable, right? You can pick it and then put it in this cotton gin, and it is going to separate those seeds out, and we're going to see cotton really explode, right? Raise your hand if you're wearing something made out of cotton today. Every hand in here has something made out of cotton, right? Cotton's huge. Cotton is a great material, right? These pants are partially made out of cotton, right? Everything in here has a percentage of it made out of cotton, right? So the cotton gin is really going to transform the world as a result. Eli Whitney is the one who would invent the cotton gin, right? And this is really going to increase that demand for cotton, right, in Europe and in the Americas. Right, so we will see European demand for cotton lead to that boom in cotton production. And as a result, we're going to see it also lead to this boom in slavery in the southern United States. Right, so those things go hand in hand. Industrial Revolution, cotton gin, all of that leads to this massive boom in slavery in the southern U.S. and why we associate slavery with cotton here in the United States.